Hello, I'm Chris, and today on Cozy Fabrications, I'm going to be taking a more in-depth look at the Alfawise U30 Pro that I did a build and test print of right here on my channel a couple of weeks ago. I've had enough time with this printer, and I think I'm ready to tell you what I like about this printer, where it needs a little bit of work, and whether it's worth you investing in right here on Cozy Fabrications. Let's go. So here I am in what I'm dubbing Studio B, which is basically the back of my garage. As you can see, it's still a bit under construction. I've built me a bench here so I can do some work, and this is so that you guys can get the content even when the house is busy and I can't really record in my dining room. So without further ado, let's keep going. Let's talk about the Alfawise U30 Pro. Just wanted to let you know, in case you heard some background noise or in case you saw me sweating, it's still, in the 90s here in Georgia, so that's what's going on. So let's first talk about the construction of this printer. When you first get it, it comes as a lot of pieces. If you want the details of how I went about building this printer and all the pitfalls that I found, you should probably go take a look at this live stream up here, which was me doing this live with Brian from BV3D, and he helped me along, and we got it together and we got it test print. But basically, it went together well. We did find out that the guide that comes in the box, the quick start guide, is missing a lot of key steps. If you use that as your guide, if you don't have a lot of experience with the printer, you're probably going to miss some things, or some things aren't going to make any sense. Thanks to Brian's suggestion, I was able to bring up the PDF guide, which is a complete assembly guide that comes on the USB stick. I recommend just starting with that one, and it will probably save you a lot of headaches and missteps. But that guide is complete, so I give them credit for that one. They probably should have just left the quick start guide out completely and basically just directed you there with some sort of insert sheet of paper. As far as the difficulty goes, this is probably about a medium difficulty. The whole thing is not a kit. There are some pieces pre-assembled. You'll notice like the X gantry is pre-assembled. Most of the base is pre-assembled. But there are some key pieces that you have to put together. There's a few wires you have to run. If you're experienced with a 3D printer, particularly one in the i3 design, I don't think you're going to have a problem assembling this one. It's going to feel like other printers you've put together, particularly if you put together like an Ender 3. Again, if you have any doubts or you're not sure about some steps, if you do get this printer, why don't you follow the live stream and see if that helps you out. Now let's talk about the frame and the movement of this printer now that we've gotten it together. So this frame is built primarily out of 2040 aluminum extrusions. In fact, the only thing that's not a 2040 aluminum extrusion is this top bar, which is a 2020, and all it is basically supporting the left and right uprights, and so that's not a big deal. Alfawise did a good job of pre-tapping all of the holes. I think there was only one hole during the entire construction where I really felt like it wasn't tapped well and I had to force it a little bit. If you have a tap kit, that can be easily fixed. If you don't, you may feel like you're doing something wrong. But like I was saying, overall, I think they did a good job tapping all the holes. There wasn't anything real dirty, anything that maybe I had to blow out a little bit. But overall, I think that this is a well-built machine. As I mentioned in the live stream, the sheet metal that they use is really thick. Nothing is flimsy here. Everything feels really good. The motion is very smooth. In fact, I don't even think I had to adjust any of the wheels. I may have to loosen one of them, but they do have what is called concentric nuts on I think all of the assemblies, so that if something is too tight or if something is too loose, if you don't like the way it moves, you twist a concentric nut with a pair of pliers. I don't think this one came with the pliers to move it, or the wrench to move it. But either way, you just adjust one of the three wheels on any of these, and it will either loosen or tighten it without you having to disassemble anything. It's a nice feature you'll find on almost all of the printers like this. This one's no exception. One thing some people may be a little concerned with is that this printer, since they've moved all of the electronics to underneath the printer, it does have 2040 extrusion feet. And when I first building it, I was a little worried that it may be a little wobbly. That did not turn out to be the case. And if it does, you could always use like a foam mat to reduce vibration and to help level it a little bit. I don't think it's going to be a problem. It looks like everything was cut well. So again, no problem on this printer, not wobbly. I moved it to this surface just now after being on a different table. Just maybe a hint of wobble, but overall, not an issue. Another thing about the construction of this printer that I haven't talked about yet was that the build plate that I received was a glass sheet that had a coated sticker or a textured sticker on top of it. Had a couple of problems with that build surface. Number one, I had a slight dip in the center of my build surface. Even though it was glass, it was not level. I don't know if it was the sticker attached to the glass or the glass itself, but that's what I found. The other problem I had with it was after I printed on it, getting prints off that surface was tough. It required a lot of scraping, which is dangerous, and I really don't like doing it. And since it's not flexible, you can't just pop it off. So what I did is what I've done on all my other printers. I put a mirror on it, had no further problems with adhesion or with it being level. It was just a piece of mirror I had left over from cutting down previous mirrors for other printers. So now let's talk about the electronics that are in this printer. As you can see, I have them uncovered here. The board in this printer is one I haven't seen before, but it's similar to the one that they use in their U30. It is called an LGT Kit V 1.0. The big difference, of course, in this one, as you'll see, is that these have removable steppers. So in this printer, they've gone for TMC 2208 drivers for the X, Y, and Z axes, and they are set to standalone mode, which apparently is in silent step mode because this printer does run quiet. For the extruder, they went with a A4988, which is a great driver for an extruder. It has a lot of power. Doesn't need to be particularly quiet because it doesn't run particularly fast. So I think this is a good setup. It would have been nice, of course, if they could have gone with a 2208 in UART mode so that it could be configured via the firmware for different voltages and stuff. But ultimately, I don't think it matters a lot. It's easy to come in here and change the voltages via the rheostat on the drivers themselves. The only thing I had to do was come in here and add a little bit more voltage on the stepper for the extruder. It was originally at 0.73 volts, and I had to change that just a little bit to a full 1 volt just to make sure that my extruder wasn't skipping. That was easy to do with the rheostat if you've ever used that before. If not, there are plenty of videos that'll show you how to increase the voltage to that stepper motor. Another great thing about this board is that this is a fully open source printer. In fact, if you go to the product page for this printer, you'll see that they've actually put the download link right on the product page. It is a Marlin 119 special configuration where they've gone in and set it up for this printer. If you download it, it compiled straight away for me, and I didn't have any problems just reflashing this board just using the standard Arduino toolkit. So works well. Give them props for releasing the source straight out of the gate for this printer. If you need to make any modifications, change any of the features, or potentially go to Marlin 2.0, there won't be any problem down the road. Last part about the electronics I'd like to mention is one of the big selling points for this printer, the U30 Pro, over the standard U30, and that's this large 4.3-inch touchscreen. Overall, I have to say the touchscreen is a nice feature. Even my wife was able to comment on how much easier it was to use than the standard, just character display that you find on a lot of printers. One day she came in, she saw a failed print. She was easily able to navigate this touchscreen to pause the print job without any other knowledge without ever having used this printer. Keep in mind, this touchscreen is basically a serial terminal for the main board, and the touchscreen has separate firmware to it. I'm still working to be in contact with Alfawise to get the firmware for this so that it can be modified. One of the things that I didn't like about this touchscreen is it has somewhat limited functionality. You'll find it has some utilities. It has the standard movement controls, has some manual bed leveling help built into it that will aid in bed leveling, but it is missing some key features. It doesn't have as much tweaking and tuning as you may want as a power user, and I still found myself having to hook up a computer directly to the printer to access the terminal directly to be able to put in G-code and to change settings manually. One of the other problems that I had with this touchscreen is the manual bed leveling seems to disable the heating of the printer. And if you've ever leveled a bed before, you probably realize that it needs to be hot, and the hot end needs to be hot due to thermal expansion before you can actually level it correctly. So by going into the bed leveling assist and having everything cool down, it's actually counterproductive. So again, I still found myself using the terminal in order to properly level this bed, although the touchscreen interface is terrific for bed leveling. So that's something that needs to be fixed in the firmware so that that utility actually works properly for 3D printing. One other thing I wanted to test out on this printer was how well the power recovery mode works. I already tested the filament runout sensor, which is terrific on this printer. Here it is. And it works great. So when the filament runs out, it recovers just fine. But I wanted to see how does it recover if the power is cut. So here I am printing this green benchy. I'm going to cut the power to it. I'm going to let the printer cool down, and then I'm going to attempt to resume this benchy using the touchscreen. So let's cut it off. There you go, power failure. And I'm going to let it cool down for just a few minutes, and then we'll cut it back on. Back at the printer, it has been cooling down for a few minutes. We're going to cut it back on, see how the printer responds and how the print looks. Recovery printing. Job is not done. Do you want to recover? I'm going to say yes. So if you notice, everything's cooled down. Bed's about 15 degrees cooler. Hot end's down to 88. So now it's going to heat back up to the target temperature and resume printing. And we're at temp. It's going to rehome and pick up where we left off. We'll check out the result when it is finished. So here's that benchy off of the simulated power failure. As you can see the line where it kind of failed, but the print was able to still finish. So if I was going to finish this print with paint and some filler, this wouldn't be a problem. It would still be good. So if this was a long print, then I would have definitely saved myself some time. As you can see, this is where it actually failed. If it fails on one of your inner lines, it would definitely be hidden. If it's on one of your outer, this is going to have to be cut off and sanded. But overall, the power failure mode does work. It would definitely save you a lot of time on a long print. Before I left the electronics section of this review, I did want to talk about a couple of the other components down here underneath the printer. So first of all, there's a Changlang name brand power supply. It's not one I'm familiar with, but it does have a name on it. It does seem to have a warranty with it. And overall, it would be easy to replace if something were to happen because it is self-contained in its own chassis. Beyond that, the only other thing of note is really that there is a cooling fan that cools down the electronics, the main board of the machine. And that fan is really loud. In fact, it is the only loud component of this machine. Other than that, it provides a very quiet printing platform. So one of the first things I would do if I was going to keep this around, use it as a daily printer, would be to replace that fan with something quieter, but with good airflow. Again, you are using 2208 drivers. They are known to get hot. You do want good airflow, but you don't want to compromise it with a noisy fan. Now let's move on to the safety of this printer. Is it a safe printer versus other models that you may find on the market? So the first thing people want to know, is there thermal runaway protection enabled on this printer in the firmware? Good answer is yes. Straight off the bat, I was able to see that thermal runaway detection was enabled because I saw it on the display while playing with the settings. What that meant is it shuts down the electronics, it stops sending electricity to the hot end and to the bed, and immediately begins to cool things down. So that's a good safety feature. Another safety feature is that from the U30 to the U30 Pro, that they actually added covers for all the electronics underneath the printer. What that does, of course, is keep your hands from things that could give you electrical shock, and is just a good idea for any commercial printer. Other than that, there are no real safety concerns over any other printer of this design. You know, it's got smooth movements, nothing really that you're going to get your hands caught in. The belts run in the channels. Overall, I think that it's a good printer that you should feel safe about running in your home. Once you get everything unpacked and assembled, how do I get started with this printer, particularly if you're new to 3D printing? Well, if you put the USB drive in that came with the printer, you'll find that it comes with an extremely old version of Cura. Now, that version of Cura may work just fine for this printer. I don't suggest it though. It is years old at this point. Head over to the Ultimaker Cura website, which you can easily Google for. I'll put some links down below. Head over there, download the latest version of Cura, which is 4.2. And if you go into 4.2, for example, there's already an Alfawise U30 Pro file. That one is already set up for this printer. It may be for the U30, but the U30 Pro is basically the same mechanically. And so therefore you won't have any problems getting started with that profile. I was able to slice models with no problem and get to printing. Now that all that's out of the way, let's talk about my actual time that I've spent with this printer and what I found out. So if you saw initially on the live stream, I printed this little fox. This little fox printed well. The printer didn't have any problems. It got all the way through the print, and as you see, it's like a 5-hour stream because I ran through the entire test print. Straight away though, I noticed that this little fox has some quality issues, and they appear to be over extrusion. What that means is the extruder is pushing too much plastic out of the hot end. There's also a possibility that what I am seeing is overheating of the filament, but through other testing I've done, it doesn't seem to be the case. I put other temperature probes on the hot end. Everything seems to be doing fine. I don't seem to be overheating. With that in mind and trying to get this printer to print just right, I printed a Benchy. My initial Benchy has some serious issues. It has a lot of what looks like just melted zones on the bottom. It also still suffers from the over extrusion that I was seeing on the little fox. And so from there, let's try to print another Benchy, but decrease the extrusion to 90%. Looking at the two, I didn't notice much different. So it doesn't really seem to be the case. And then, just to make sure that my menus were doing the flow rate correctly, I also did the same thing in Cura to see if Cura did a better job of decreasing the flow rate. And again, they almost look identical, 90% not doing the job. Just to make sure that I wasn't seeing some other issues with this printer, I also started taking a look at the other components of this printer. And first thing I did was I've seen issues like this in the past, things that I've chased before. So one of the things I did is I replaced the default brass nozzle with a better nozzle that I had from Performance 3D. That immediately actually resulted in a much cleaner print. I saw less extrusion lines. I saw less of the heating problems, or whatever you want to call it, the melted zones on the bottom of the print. And it started to immediately clean that up. Finally, I also looked at the cooling, because again, what I was seeing on the bottom of the print appeared to me to be not only possibly over extruding, but with some cooling issues. So to make a long story short, here is the original cooling shroud that I had on my printer. Here's a new one I printed off of Thingiverse. This one is called the Airflow for Alfawise U30. It's by a user spelled SLAAVKOO, link in the description. And this also really helped in cleaning up the print. So this one is the final benchy that I printed on this printer, and while it's still not perfect, it really did help. It helped clean up some more of that issue I was seeing on the bottom of the print that I still think is a bit of a cooling issue. So I think ultimately that in order to get this really printing to the level that I would expect it to, I think this whole piece is going to have to be replaced by probably just a 3D printed part, and to move back to a blower. It's going to be a little louder, but it's going to put the airflow where it needs to be to cool the part efficiently to prevent those ugly overhangs. So the next thing I did was try to get the flow rate just right on a test print, but for that I felt like I needed a bigger print in order to accomplish it. So I went with the Singing Dragon model, and starting at the bottom, I noticed that it was really over extruding. You could see it by the way it puffs up on the print lines. And so I was able to dial it in. In order to get it just right, in order to stop the scraping, I had to take the extrusion all the way down to an 80% flow rate. Once I was there, my print looked clean. There's no real issues with this print, except I'm still seeing the cooling issues on the overhang, so that's still a problem. Once I got it to where I thought it was printing correctly, I tried a couple more test prints. First of all, I did this overhang test, and you'll notice in the overhang test there is some drooping. There are some missed cooling lines, meaning some of the printed lines that should have been fine in an overhang drooped down, they broke, they just weren't able to cool fast enough. So still seeing that cooling issue I mentioned before. So how about this flow rate to produce good quality, geometrically accurate prints? So I went to one of my old standbys. This is the Maker's Muse tolerance gauge, and I have to say this was printed on a raft, and the quality of this print's really good. If you'll see, this has different tolerances all the way from 0.5, 0.4, 0.3, 0.2, and even a 0.15 tolerance. That tolerance, of course, is the difference from one line to the next line of the print as we are leaving gaps so that this print can move. So this one, I was able to take, after getting that flow rate correct, I was able to get this print to move all the way at the 0.15 tolerance, which I just thought was fantastic. A couple other prints, printed these Flexi Rex and Flexi Unicorn. Wanted to look at the quality. The walls look exceptional. These are just straight vertical walls. They look great. And same thing with the Flex Rex. Quality looks great on these. The top layers and bottom layers look exactly like you expect. Again, this is the 80% flow. Looks perfect on here. And finally, this guy, which is a Hypercube that I downloaded off of Thingiverse. And no stringing whatsoever. Again, this was with my upgraded nozzle. Want to make that clear. No stringing whatsoever. And in fact, the only print artifacts that I really see on this is from the overhangs. Again, there's still a cooling problem that you can see on these extreme, probably a minimum of 45-degree overhangs that you see on here. And it's marring up what would have been an otherwise terrific print. So one last thing on the over extrusion. So I've done all of my test prints. I've found that I can get this printer printing well with just that one change in my settings, changing that flow rate to 80%. I wasn't content with that, so I went to Twitter. I put a call out for the 3D printing community. Can you help me with a printer that is over extruding or seemingly over extruding, but you know, all of the settings seem correct. I've double checked everything I knew to double check. They gave me a list of ideas. I went and checked all of those ideas. Those were: check your slicer, make sure you have the filament diameter set correctly. Check, no problem there. They went and told me to check the thermistor, make sure that that seemed correct, that the temperatures were correct. I did that. I checked with a multimeter with a thermistor on it, as well as with a laser thermometer, which isn't nearly as good on something like this because it reflects. But again, I was able to verify it is heating. It's definitely not overheating because all of my surface readings were less than what you would expect, because you know, the thermistor that is on this hot end is actually inside of the metal. So it was what I expected to see. Other than that, various ideas, none of them seemed to pan out. So I want to interrupt my own video here and let you know I couldn't leave well enough alone. I kept messing with this printer even after I'd filmed this entire review, started the editing process. I had one more idea. Worked in software long enough to know that software is finicky. Sometimes weird things happen. So I downloaded that firmware that they had available as open source on their website. Pulled down that Marlin 119 firmware, recompiled it for this printer, reloaded the firmware on the printer. The bootloader was there, everything loaded easily, and after doing that, the over extrusion was gone. 100% flow rates working fine. I back it off a little bit almost on any printer I have, but I seem to have solved it just by flashing the firmware, which was available and easy to recompile. But seems like I've solved that problem, so mark that little oddity off your list, and it's printing great now. So keep watching about the rest of my thoughts on this printer. So what are my final thoughts on this printer? Is this something that you should consider if you are looking for a printer in the sub $230 price range? So first of all, the construction of this printer. I really love the construction, as I mentioned. I think that it is a wonderful sturdy frame. I think the fact that they spent the extra money on thicker steel and that the overall construction, there's not a lot of plastic on this printer, which means it's sturdy, it's going to last. You don't have to worry about things wearing out. As far as the electronics go, you're buying a printer that already has a mainboard that's not going to require you to have to go out and upgrade it immediately. It's a piece that will work great out of the box. It already has an ATmega 2560, which I forgot to mention before, that will hold all of the features of Marlin 119 that you're going to want to include in your printer. Also has the TMC 2208 steppers already on the board that are swappable in the future if you want to upgrade them. These are all things that other printers make you upgrade right out of the box if you want the silent stepping, if you want a faster processor, but this one already has it. And over the U30 Pro still has the larger touchscreen, which again, I like the larger touchscreen. If they do release the firmware for that, there's going to be a lot that you can do on that touchscreen in order to enhance the usability of this printer, as well as there's just more data there and it's easier to do things like auto bed leveling and stuff like that using that larger interface. Obviously, I've talked about the things that the printer really needed fixed out of the gate. I had to put on a new bed because the one that I received did have a dip in the middle of it. I put glass on it, which I probably would have done anyway. It doesn't come with the flex plate system, and my choice build surface is glass, and so I put the mirror on here. I haven't looked back. You are probably going to want to replace the cooling system of this. This works. If you're building a lot of things that do not have a lot of overhang, this is going to work just fine. But I don't really like it. I think it's really the biggest downside of this printer is the cooling's not quite right. Finally, I think people are obviously going to ask the big question. Ender 3 Pro is still the big printer on the block. It's still the printer in this price range that everyone's going to compare it to. I think that without the problems that I mentioned, this is a much better printer than an Ender 3 Pro. I think it's got better construction. I think it has a better main board. There's just less you're going to have to upgrade. Plus, it has this large touchscreen that you're not getting with an Ender 3. So whether you'll have to kind of compare the Ender 3 Pro in terms of how it works out of the box with how this one works out of the box. This printer could have been a lot better if those issues that I found weren't here. It would have been an absolute just out of the park, yes, go buy this printer if those issues weren't here. But I do think that they're relatively easy. Once someone has redesigned this to provide better cooling, I think it's going to be a no-brainer. This is going to be the printer. But I think there needs to be a little bit more work done on it, maybe a little bit longer in the community, and this will be the choice, because there's less money that has to go into it at the end of the day. There's no need to upgrade the main board. There's no need to upgrade the display. There's no need to upgrade any of the movement because it works just fine in terms of kind of the core technology that's in the printer. Anyway, that's my 2 cents. I look forward to hearing your review of what I've told you here, as well as your review of my review. Let me know in the description what you think about this printer and what you think about my analysis of this printer. Oh, one more editing interruption here. Forgot to mention, this printer was provided by the folks at Gearbest. They sent this over to me to take a look at. They wanted to share it with you. They wanted my opinions on it, and I appreciate that. And so if you're interested in getting one of these printers, please follow my links in the description. That'll take you over to Gearbest where you can pick one of these up for yourself. And thanks to Gearbest for providing these. There was no additional money that changed hands, but the affiliate links are in the description that help out the channel. I've got a couple more printers coming soon that I'm going to be taking a look at, as well, of course, my printer upgrade videos and some projects I'm working on. Please like, subscribe, share this video, and I look forward to seeing you next time right here on Kersey Fabrications. Thanks for watching.